Good morning. I hope you're all doing well and you had a wonderful Easter. And we're going to continue our Sunday school lessons, and we're going to continue right at the same time that Jesus was raised from the dead. And if I were to ask you, most of you I think would know what an eyewitness is. An eyewitness is somebody who actually saw what happened. They saw it with their own two eyes, and so they know it's true. So we're going to talk about the eyewitnesses that saw Jesus after he rose from the dead. And so they know it's true, and God put their accounts in the Bible so that we can know it's true. God gives us faith to believe that it's true, and he also gave us these wonderful accounts that tell us that Jesus did rise from the dead. So we're going to start early Sunday morning. I want you to kind of picture the sun is just starting to come up on Easter Sunday. Jesus has been raised from the dead, and most people are still sleeping. Some are up early, and some are getting ready to leave Jerusalem, go back to their homes because the Passover is over. And it's just a bright, sunny day, so the sun is coming up. And very early in the morning, Mary Magdalene and Mary and Salome and some other women go to the tomb, and they're going to put more spices on. And they're the first ones to hear that Jesus has risen from the dead. And they didn't see, but they heard. And so they run and tell Peter and John. Actually, just Mary Magdalene ran and told them. And Peter and John run to the grave, and they find out too from the angels that Jesus has risen from the dead. So they have heard, but no one has seen yet. But John, when he hears from the angel, believes Jesus is the Son of God. He is the Messiah that God promised. And yes, he was raised from the dead. His heart was totally clean. So later that morning, just as the sun has come up a little bit, Mary Magdalene goes back to the grave by herself. And as she goes, she stands at the very opening to the grave. And she doesn't quite know what to think yet. She's heard that the grave was empty. And she's crying. And she's sad. And she looks in, and there's an angel sitting on the bench where Jesus' body was. And one at one end and one at the other end. And the angels say, "Why are you crying?" And Mary says, "Because they took him away. They took him away, and I don't know where he is." And then she turns, and as she turns, she sees a man. She's not sure who he is. She thinks he's the gardener that takes care of the site there where all the tombs are, and takes care of the flowers and the grass and makes things look neat and clean. And she sees this man. We know who he is. But she doesn't. She thinks he's the gardener. And she's still crying, and the tears are running down her cheek. And Jesus says, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "Sir, if you've taken him away, tell me, where have you taken him? And tell me where he is so that I can go and take him." And Jesus looks at Mary, and he says one word. He says, "Mary." He calls her by name. He knows her. He loves her. And as soon as she heard her name, she said, "Rabbi, teacher." And she goes to hug him because she knows this is not the gardener. This is Jesus. And she goes to hug him, and he says, "No, don't hug me yet. I'm not going to stay here on earth too long. Will you go tell my brothers that I am going to go to heaven soon?" And Mary is so excited. And I love that Jesus said, "Go tell my brothers." He doesn't call them his disciples. He calls them his brothers, because there's nobody closer than a brother, right? And so Mary goes and tells them, and she finds the disciples, and they are mourning. They're sad. Some are sitting quietly, others are talking quietly. And they're sad, and their hearts are hurting. And she tells them, I saw him with my own eyes. They don't believe her. And then a little later on in the day, Mary and Salome and some other women, they too go to the tomb. And as they go to the tomb, they see Jesus. Now, it's not just one woman now, it's many women. We don't know exactly how many. But they go to the tomb, and there's Jesus right there. And they all see them with their own eyes. And he says to them, rejoice, be happy, be glad, be thankful, sing. And they realize Jesus is not dead. He has risen like the angel said. And so Jesus says to them, go tell my brothers, and he uses that word again, my brothers, he loves them like brothers, to meet me, not in Jerusalem, but to go to Galilee, way up north, and tell them they will see me there. So these women that have all seen with their own eyes go to the disciples, and they say, we saw him, he's alive. And he told us for you to go to Galilee, and you will see him there. He'll meet you there. So now it's not just one woman that saw him. Now it's many. And so you'd think they would believe. And they said, oh, you women are foolish. It's like you're making up tales. It's like a fairy tale. And they didn't believe. Then on that same day, there were two men. They were leaving Jerusalem. They were leaving Jerusalem most likely because the Passover was over. And they were going to a town called Emmaus. It's 7 miles away. So it would have taken quite a bit of time, maybe 3 hours, to walk that way. And one of the man's name is Cleopas. And Cleopas and this other man, we don't know who he is, are walking and talking. And they're reviewing what had happened. We don't know if they saw the crucifixion or if they just heard of it. But you know, all of Jerusalem was talking about it, and they're talking. And then this man comes up and joins him. And that's not unusual, because everybody walked everywhere. So if you found people to walk with, you usually walked with them. So this man comes to join in the walk. Well, you guys know who he is. But Cleopas and this other man did not. And they continue talking. And Jesus says, why are you two so sad? And they said, don't you know? Have you not been in Jerusalem? Haven't you heard all the things that have happened just in the last 3 days? And Jesus says, what things? And they didn't recognize him because God had darkened their eyes. They knew he was a man, but they just thought he was just any ordinary man walking with them on that road 7 miles to Emmaus. And Jesus says, what things are you talking about? And Cleopas and the other man were like, haven't you heard the prophets, the chief priests? They crucified Jesus. We had hoped that he would come and save us from the Romans. And then now he's dead, and that's why we're sad. And we can't believe you haven't heard that. And then there's this rumor going around that women have seen him, and that these women are saying he's alive. And Jesus stops them from talking, and he says, you're rather foolish. Don't you know Christ had to suffer and die? That it fulfills all the scriptures? And he went back in the scriptures and talked about Abraham and Isaac and Moses and Jacob, and showed him that the Christ, that Jesus, would have to suffer. And so they finish their walk, and as they get to the town of Emmaus, and they're going to go through the archway, Jesus turns as if he's going to go on. And Cleopas and the other man say, oh, no, please stay with us. And why don't you come with us and just have dinner with us, and we'll make a meal and we'll share a meal together. They still didn't know. They thought he was an ordinary man. And so Jesus agrees, and he goes into Emmaus, and they sit down, and I'm sure that it was a good meal of maybe watermelon and maybe some dates and figs and some fish and cheese and bread. And Jesus sat with them, and Jesus took that bread and he broke it. And as soon as he broke it, Cleopas and the other man were, "Oh, it's Jesus!" They were shocked, and they turned, and poof, he was gone. He had disappeared. Now remember, Jesus has this glorified body, and because he's God, he can just disappear like that. We know that from before when he disappeared on the Sea of Galilee and just poofed. We know that when he walked through Jerusalem one time, he just walked through a crowd and nobody saw him. And so Cleopas and this other man now believe we have seen Jesus Christ who died, who was crucified. We've seen him with our own eyes. We're eyewitnesses. We know he is alive. And then they turned to each other and they said, "Remember when we were walking? Our eyes were blind, but didn't our hearts? They burned inside of us. We knew. And they said, "He is risen indeed." So now 2 men have seen him. The group of women have seen him, and Mary Magdalene has seen him. More and more people are going to see him, and we'll finish the other people in the next couple weeks. The eyewitnesses that saw him and know for a fact Jesus Christ was raised from the dead after he paid the price for our sins. Isn't that the most wonderful news? We miss you guys. We can hardly wait to get back to Sunday school together. All your teachers, Mrs. Gibson, Mrs. Bakay, Mrs. Wood, Mrs. Einsland, we all say hi. Hope you're doing great, and we love you. Have a great week.